bones, she put it all back by the doctrine of lies. To fuck to mention, I shall pass to me as I make my way through to the promised land.
Now I bring you a little bit more to the front. Now we are almost the same. My head is just more like a tomato, you know. It's a little bit like Ernie and Bert, Eggesh and Bekkesh, no? These two guys from Sesame Street. Little bit like this. I'm this round guy with the tomato, and you are this banana, you know, like. So, so only already on a purely neuropsychological level, this will work, you know, because people need to. You need this kind of the odd couple always has to one banana and one orange, I think, you know. It's a sort of archetypal. Now we will also attract even the Jungians because they will see the archetypal odd couple, you know, like. Okay, but Luís.
Calling someone a banana in Portuguese is not a very nice thing.
I don't know if it's so nice in English, but.
Yeah, true. Okay.
But so here we are. Hello, Luís. Hello to all. This is our first, how do you like to call it, talk or show or talk show. And it's called Spirit is a Bone. And actually, I think I'm not lying if I say that Spirit is a Bone is a sort of new Lisbon association, and we are very happy, if I can speak in our both names already, Luís, we're very happy and honored that, you and me, Luís and I, were asked to curate this new thing here on the internet. But I guess today it will be just a sort of starter, an amuse-gueule for more serious work and stuff to come. At least that's what we are aiming for. I think we are aiming somehow for regular seminars and live talks and winter and summer schools, if I'm right. We plan to do also this show more often, although we just start with the first one. So let's see if we can get to the end of it. And at least we want to do that on a regular basis. Well, let's see if we can stick to this promise. So we kick off today with a program that consists of 2 items. First of all, we want to talk a little bit about what is Spirit is a Bone. What is this association standing for? What are we going to do there? How are we going to fill in a program for the next couple of months, years? Let's see how far that goes. It's ambitious, but we will talk about that. What does Spirit is a Bone mean? Why do we think we have to do something like this? What's the aim of it? And secondly, second part of today is in fact that we want to dive into a reading, our particular reading, a special reading, I hope also a reading that has never been done from this angle, a reading of a book that has, and you will for sure want to say more about that, Luís, a book that has its 35 years anniversary this year. We are just on the end of 2024. That's also, I think, why you especially wanted to start with that book. So what we want to do, which book I'm talking about now, I have to say it, of course. It's the Sublime Object of Ideology by this infamous philosopher and legendary cultural theorist Slavoj Žižek. This book has an incredible importance for me, I think also for you. If you want to start to talk about that first, or you would like to introduce yourself a little bit, that could also maybe help. Maybe just to introduce quickly myself, I'm I'm already getting emotional for my own introduction, so that's promising. So I'm a musician basically, but I have studied 25 years ago or longer cultural and medical anthropology. That's why I dived into all this cultural studies shit a little bit. I have read also Slavoj Žižek I think in 95. I started reading it when it just came out in Dutch. The first book that was published by him was in 95, if I'm right. I have been studying also psychoanalysis from that moment on. I have used it in my own anthropological work, but my anthropological career was rather, I would say, a failure. I have been doing all kind of jobs afterwards, and now I find myself into this situation that I'm a sort of, let's say, researcher, musicologist, and director of a musical ensemble. I think this is something that also connects us, Luís, that we are both in performance arts, in music, that our angle will also be this artistic angle. But, well, maybe you can introduce yourself and we talk a little bit more about that in what comes.
And first of all, it's a pleasure also to be here with you. Our approach is so similar because also we have a similar place in culture because we are both performers. We are both working with musicology and research, and of course, I'm a lot newer to this huge field of psychoanalysis and Hegelian Lacanian thinking, and I was thankfully introduced to it by you when I was your student in Basel. But so just basically to introduce myself, I'm Luís Neiva. I'm a musician primarily. Recently, I started going further into research, doing musicology, mostly working with Renaissance, that is 16th century music and culture. And I'm trying now to navigate through this repertoire and through this amazing world of the Renaissance through psychoanalysis, through a philosophy that allows us to think outside of a purely closed contextual particular place. And I think that's why I like psychoanalysis, and that's why Žižek is also so important for cultural studies and for many different applications that we can give to it. And talking about the book, you're right. I think this book deserves some kind of how to say, some kind of anniversary celebration. It's 35 years in December, so it's to the month. It's exactly 35 years ago that this book came out, and it was incredibly important at the time, even if it was, I would say, kind of ignored. But it is now even more important because 35 years ago, of course, it was the fall of the Berlin Wall, and the world was struggling with this very strong confrontation between two ideologies. And we, in '89, with the victory of capitalism, people thought that, okay, now the ideological struggle is over. We will live in a post-ideological state where everything is more or less easy to predict. In the same year, there's another text that is very important. It's by Francis Fukuyama, The End of History, that basically predicts this. It's a reflection of this thinking. And Žižek is one of the few that actually saw that there's no such thing as a post-ideological state, and there's no such thing as a non-decaying state or place to be. And this was, I would say, ignored by most people, even by the left today. We are still hanging to this idea of a conserving a quite peaceful and non-changeable world. And more than never, this book is incredibly relevant today, in my opinion.
Yeah, that's interesting. And also maybe it's good to add that our take on this book is at the same time, I would say, not so much a direct political or even political, economical, social one, although the last element we could maybe, of course, this aspect is absolutely there.
Yeah.
But I think what we also would like to do is touching on elements that are more linked to culture in general, arts also, and even history. The idea, the importance of history, and what I think we agree both upon is that this book of Žižek, The Sublime Object, is basically also an analysis of history and of modernity, but not just modernity as a historical period, but rather as a sort of impossibility, an impossibility that has, let's say, actualized itself in the French Revolution in the end of the 18th century, but is still something that we are not getting over. It's not that we are, since that period, since the 19th century, we are in modernity. In fact, we are continuously, struggling with this traumatic idea of modernity, and therefore also we see, for example, how a big part of the left, for example, slips back into an anti-modernity or an alternative modernity. And one of the interesting things of Žižek, I think, is what we also want to explore, is that he absolutely sticks to this idea of modernity, but not just a modernity which is, let's say, a glorious, let's say, victorious modernity, a sort of progress, idea of progress that has been finally put itself into a civilization, but rather as a gap, as something that is traumatic to realize and traumatic to just take up. And so we have the feeling that I think what we were gonna explore is this fact that we are continuously, that even if we talk about the past, we can only do that from this traumatic point of modernity. You can say even talking about the past is only possible when you do that through when you have been working through, or even not working, but just gone through this trauma of modernity. And you can say that even going back to the past is a way of, well, maybe even circumventing the trauma of modernity. It's in a lot of cases, it's also going back to something we have lost, going back to something we could maybe learn from the past as this, what is called prelapsarian, paradisiac state where things were still harmonious, where things were still good. This is, of course, a stance that I think reactionary people would take up just bluntly. The left is doing that in a much more disguised way. And I think one of the interesting things that we try to, what we want to explore also, that's one of the aims of the association Spirit is a Bone, is how maybe a thinker like Hegel marked that moment, this change of thinking about it. So it's in fact a moment of being aware of your own historicity, of the fact that you can not think the present and then eventually in extension the future without going back to the past. But it's not just a kind of recuperation or a historicist idea of trying to see wie es eigentlich gewesen ist, how some German 19th century historians were naming that. But it's rather a way of how to say, like the past is this very weird, almost like a science fiction domain, I would almost dare to say. There is this strange thing that I think we are both also very fascinated how many science fiction books are about going back to the past. I think maybe this even the model of the classical science fiction is that it's always also when it wants to let's say when it wants to show or explore a fictional future world, it's always through an image of the past. If you go from Mad Max to Blade Runner, these worlds are always worlds of, they are almost like medieval, or they are pre-modern in a way. So it looks, when you look at these science fiction films, it's clear that the future is always a regression or going back to some pre-modernity or a mixed modernity or something. So I think this is very important. And I don't know, maybe we should a little bit talk about, if you have still to say something about what I'm just now saying, or we dive into what spirit is a bone, if we try to lift a little bit of this veil, or maybe just we talk about the veil itself, because maybe there is not even a lifting up of the veil, let's say. But maybe we can talk a little bit about this quote, this statement of Hegel, spirit is a bone, because I don't know if you agree, Luís, but for us, I think this is, well, we are happy that the association chose this as its motto, as its flag, let's say, because it's so ambiguous, it's so cutting itself in a way. It's like a sort of split quote. It has two elements, spirit and bone. They look already like a paradox, something that cannot be reconciled in a way. And I think what we love is this problem of impasse, the problem of impossibility of reconciliation. And I think if you agree with me, maybe you can elaborate a little bit more on that exactly Žižek was this guy in the 90s that made it possible for us today to not only stitch Lacan and Hegel together, but also gave this completely new reading of what Hegel would call the absolute, like an absolute that has a cut, let's say. So even now, I think you and me, we have this problem when we talk about Hegel, that a lot of people have not gone through this new Hegelian reading, and that they are a little bit stuck in this kind of, the old-fashioned Hegel, the Hegel of the Prussian state, the great glorious Hegel, that is a reactionary philosopher, that is a state philosopher. And I think one of the aims, if you agree with me, is of this show is a little bit to help people just go back to Hegel and read it. Try to think that again with the help of maybe, and I think it's also interesting because in the beginning of Sublime Object, he calls it the miracle, no? The miracle of this stitching together of two totally expired discourses, Hegelianism and Lacanianism. Lacan and Hegel, I think they are the most ostracized and blamed figures of cultural studies today. And I think you and me will love, for this reason alone, to recuperate them, to take them up, take again up the shit, so to say. But okay, I have talked too much. Maybe I don't know what you have to say on that.
Yeah, and that's, I think, a great point to stress with Žižek, is that the way he gets these two authors who have been forgotten, and especially like this alien dream of utopia that was taken up by Marx falls in 1989. So when and Lacan had just died in 81, and he was also not very popular even among psychoanalysis. So the way he takes these two authors who were basically lost, were somehow needed some redeeming, and that he basically makes them redeem each other. And it's amazing how the way he does it is by keeping their discourses open enough so that some similarities and some bridges can emerge. And this, I think, is something that we stand for. I think I can talk by both of us in this regard, is that we are for not purely exegetic readings, but really by readings that allow space for ideas to emerge, to die, and to contradict themselves. And it's a lot really like a process of psychoanalysis. Whoever did psychoanalysis knows that this experience of just talking through like whatever comes to mind, and that some ideas are productive, some ideas are not productive at all, and usually the ideas that look more banal and just non-interesting are the ones taken up by the analyst just to revert them into something deep. And I think this is a lot of the process that Žižek goes through, the idea of taking up these two authors and opening them up for analysis, so to say. And this, I think, works amazingly. And it leads to one of Žižek's main points. Also, the other authors that are with Žižek in this approach, that are mostly based in Ljubljana, like Mladen Dolar and Alenka Zupančič. And one thing that it's obvious that they give a lot of importance in Hegel is the idea of the infinite judgment. So spirit is a bone, God is Christ, all these very, very almost problematic statements that oppose ideas that are apparently not possible to oppose. And maybe just to start talking about a little bit about it, this and it will become obvious by the end of the book. So this is an entire trip just to justify the infinite judgment as something that can be politically and artistically and philosophically valid, and that should be a good place to start thinking about things. And for Hegel, this infinite judgment is also a way to represent the sublime. And it's a way to represent the sublime in a very non-obvious way. So if for Kant, for example, if you wanted to represent God, which is the idea of the absolute non-measurable entity, then you take a very, very, very big thing like a mountain or a canyon or a big, big landscape, and you realize how this enormous thing still fails in comparison with God. And Hegel makes this tricky and very, very interesting step where it says, well, for us to really grasp the absolute, we should get to the opposite, not to the second biggest thing, but to the most useless, pointless detail, and to see how this absolute itself has a gap, and that the only way we can understand it is as incomplete. And this incompleteness is a reflection; it reflects itself on the very opposite of the idea. So, for example, a very famous chapter on the phenomenology of spirit, when it relates to Hegel, talks about religion. And there's an infinite judgment that I like very much, the idea of God is Christ. And of course, a Catholic would basically say, okay, God is Christ, but there's no problem with this quote. It's simply a truth. But to really think about it and to really be literally Christian about it, we cannot say that God is the Father and just Christ is the Son, and they are two separate entities, and just Christ comes to earth and then he goes back and everything is the same. To say that God is Christ is to say that Christ is, in fact, God on earth. He's not a separate person, he's the same person. But then how to understand this idea of God as a infinite, immortal, all-knowing, all-powerful entity, and at the same time, the only way we can really represent it is by the image of a dying man humiliated and suffering on the cross. It's an incredibly productive and interesting contradiction that Hegel uses to show how the absolute has a crack inside. And this, I think, is what's wonderful about these infinite judgments, is that they allow us to talk about the unsayable, not as something that is beyond our grasp of too much meaning, but actually the unsayable transmits a lack of meaning, an absence, a void of meaning. And I think this is an amazing, interesting way for artists, especially, because we are always dealing with this the aesthetic experience of art and how to connect with audiences and how to connect with ourselves and how to make meaningful performances and meaningful art objects. And maybe this approach that art reflects itself or gains importance not in the overwhelming meaning, but actually in the point where meaning disappears. I don't know if you have something to say about it.
No, I agree. I agree with that. I liked also that you talked about experience, but giving it that twist of a sort of something that is today hard to swallow, maybe in the sense that an experience that is at the same time sort of non-experience. The fact that you would in the end fall in sort of impasse. And I think how also Žižek recuperated Hegel in this weird way is that he becomes suddenly the philosopher of this impasse. Like Lacan. I mean, in Lacan, it's obvious, let's say. I think that's maybe this Lacanization of Hegel also. With Hegel, it was not obvious at all. And I think to almost elevate the infinite judgment to this literal the level of this impasse, almost as a symbol of this impasse. I think this is something even for Hegelians today. It's hard to swallow that. And I think even if you read Mladen, Dolar, all these guys from the Ljubljana school, then of course most of the things of Žižek. We will go now very soon into the sublime object. You talked already about the sublime. There is this element of, let's say, what you also find in a lot of medieval philosophers that I love, Cusanus and so on, when the maximum is the minimum, in fact. As Nicolas of Cusa would say, the highest and the lowest fall together in an impossible way almost. Like that's also, I think, why Žižek found this way to talk so much about popular culture, about things that are absolutely seemingly culturally unimportant, and details, meaningless elements, like what Roland Barthes would call the punctum, no, in a painting or in a photograph. These things that nobody looks at, but at the same time, unconsciously, you would say they are the trigger point in one way or another, or they are the point in the artwork where the artwork, cannot be stitched together anymore, where it falls apart, or where it starts to crack, or where there is a rupture. But this rupture, of course, because, and that's also what I think in the Sublime Object, one moment it comes also, there is this point where he also talks about old art. What is the problem with old art or ancient art is that it has this huge symbolic sublime lure, no? This allure, as you would say in French, this aura. It has an aura still. And it is because of this aura that we are, let's say, that we are trapped in the painting, and we are trapped in the fetish of the painting. The painting is too beautiful. And what I think our work will be is to help our listeners and to help ourselves in the first place, I think, because this, I think, is also a struggle that we are going through ourselves with artworks, with social phenomena, with cultural phenomena. We are both very fascinated, I think, in this idea of, for example, reenacting music of the past, for example, like, or people that are, indeed, you talked already about religion. How is it possible that people call themselves Christian, but at the same time don't see how Christianity itself is this, as Hegel would have said, this really modern religion that cuts with all previous, let's say, pagan religions, what you want to call them, and the religions of antiquity, where you get really a traumatic core, and where you get a god who becomes that piece of shit. I think we are going to still talk a lot about shit. It's a very psychoanalytic way of talking about things. It's also something that Žižek takes continuously up. He talks a lot about garbage.
I already am eating from the trash can all the time. The name of this trash can is ideology.
We have this problem of huge heaps of waste. Walter Benjamin talks about them in the thesis of history, and we will come back to that because it's also in the Sublime Object, the book of Žižek. The problem of waste. We are wasting our time with maybe doing this podcast instead of studying and reading and doing something better. We are wasting the viewers' time with that, maybe, who are zapping from one podcast to the other, or from one YouTube show to the other. I love that idea of waste. Waste is, I think, what modernity is about, is that waste is the core of, at the same time, everything we love, the sublime object, because we don't know it's waste, of course. We think it's great. We the commodity, as Marx would have called it. And at the same time, it's this trash thing, the thing that once we have bought it, but you can, I think, everything today is somehow circulating around this kind of experience. For example, all these nowadays exhibitions you have, which are mostly called once in a lifetime experience. I don't know. You have one great artist, Van Gogh, or it's Bruegel, or it's one of the other Flemish primitives, Van Eyck, or it's Monet. And there is a great retrospective exhibition of this artist's work, and then it's promoted as once in a lifetime experience. And well, it's experience as trash, you can say. It's in fact you are lured to buy your ticket to Paris or to Belgium somewhere or to the Vienna Art Historical Museum. And when you have seen it all, well, it's one experience more of all these experiences we have continuously, and we put it on the waste bin of experience, you can say. We put it on that heap of one of another experience. And so, in fact, from this great moment of promise that we felt in the beginning when we go to such an exhibition, to the moment when we put it on the waste bin of our accumulating experiences, which are then at the same time non-experiences, I think here something happens. It's like what Walter Benjamin, I'm a little bit, I have to be careful not to drop names here, but I think we will come all back to that. Walter Benjamin would call that a constellation or a dialectical image. This idea that we are, on the one hand, dragged into something sublime. The sublime, what you said, very beautiful, I think, Luís. What I like a lot is that you said that what Hegel did is putting the sublime to earth. There is this, maybe you know this funny anecdote when he was with his romantic friends in the somewhere, I think it was end of the 18th century still, he took a couch to the Alps, and the guys looked outside and said, "Look, my God, these Alps, sublime experience of nature. What a wonderful experience, this crazy, what nature can do, Mother Nature, this great achievement of Mother Nature." And then Hegel couldn't, let's say, disguise his laughter a little bit and would end his silence with just to say, well, and so it is. So ist es in German. That's it. Just like so. I think what Hegel does there is exactly trying to explain already what spirit is a bone means. It's that to think spirit. I think we will go still in the depth to what that word could mean. What spirit is in fact very clearly said as it is a bone, and at the same time it's of course not a bone. We have to grapple continuously with this impossibility of what it would mean that things are and are not what they look like. No, I don't know.
Yeah, it is. I think also because, as you said, we are both busy with mostly works of a so-called pre-modern period, and we will, I think, problematize this term that I think we both don't like it very much, that we call something pre-modern, and it's exactly this being and not being at the same time that basically characterizes modernity, that we never know fully what we are doing, and we are always confronted with this unsurpassable contradiction. And then, of course, we try to replace it with all kinds of things, just so because we cannot face it, because it is a too traumatic experience. But then we put on the past the responsibility for holding this perfect place for us, that in the past this contradiction didn't exist. And that's why I think even among Žižekians, our approach is kind of new, that we are looking to this pre-modernity and saying, well, the pre-modernity was also modernity. For them, they also had this problem of dealing with contradiction and having to replace it with something else. So there's never a perfect place. There's never a utopia in the past. And of course, the far right is very busy with this idea of a perfect past. The left sometimes forgets about the past at all, as I think you said in the beginning. And it's also a way to think politics, to think art, to think culture without an absolute and substantial authority done by the past in relationship to us. So it's a new way to think history fundamentally.
I think, yeah. Would you agree that in fact pre-modernity can be only thought when the idea of modernity has been established? It means that. So there is not. It's thanks to, let's say, our historical capacities, thinking the past, going back to the past, that something like what has been before modernity is, let's say, suddenly established as if it is something substantial in itself, as if it exists as such, and as if it would be a kind of realm of non-contradiction. No, I think that's what basically what you're up to, what I'm agreeing with. And I think for that, also for this reason, to think through modernity is absolutely crucial. It's not that we are going back to the past to see as a kind of antidotum to modernity. It's rather to understand what this trauma of modernity is really standing for, in fact, what it's hiding, what it's obfuscating, also what it reveals, what it could be worked through, what it's I have the feeling that for our research and what is coming, that the concept of modernity, not as a period in itself, but as a traumatic signifier almost, is absolutely crucial. And maybe one thing I could add here is that as a kind of method, or like a sort of instrumentarium that we want to use, there is this wonderful idea by Jacques Lacan. I think is in one of his seminars, like 13 or something, when he talks about Velazquez, and he says there, well, to make a long story short, he says there somewhere that we have to go through Velazquez, but only through Marcel Duchamp. We can only understand the art of Velazquez when we have seen it through the glasses of, or through the artworks, maybe through the urinoir of Duchamp, Marcel Duchamp. So I think for us it's almost like maybe it sounds blasphemic now, but I hope we can unpack it in what will still come. It's a little bit like another hero of us is, I guess, I think we will also try to read some books of him, is Georges Didi-Huberman, the French art historian, who, for example, one of his first books was a reading of the paintings in Florence in the 15th century of Fra Angelico. Like, if people hear this name of Fra Angelico, they think of this kind of almost a little bit boring Christian painter with that people use when they have a sort of an event to put on a little card or something, a Christmas card painter, no? Fra Angelico, the most boring 15th century painter. But his book is almost, if I can say it so bluntly, a reading from 20th century abstract painters like Pollock, and to go back to Fra Angelico. In fact, almost to say it in a very blunt way, how Fra Angelico was already a sort of Pollock avant la lettre. You cannot think Fra Angelico without going through abstract expressionists and so on. So what I love there is that it's only through our breakthrough of modernity that we can see how people in the past were doing their stuff, as if they couldn't see themselves what they were doing, that we need to somehow regulate our own crack or our own alienation to understand how they were alienated, so to speak. So there is some kind of weird parallelism or analogy there. And I think that's something that absolutely extensively is elaborated by Hegel and revealed by Žižek. I think that's a little bit, well.
Yeah, it's also because you were talking about that, and I completely agree. And I was thinking that maybe there's a really strong, how to say, bridge between this idea that you were talking about, that we are alienated with our own present the same way they were, and this kind of whole that connects us is also the whole that connects the two ideas on the infinite judgment. The spirit and the bone have something that doesn't close inherently in each of them, and in this connection there's basically the Hegel's let's call it kernel, and I was thinking that maybe it's a helpful way to think how we are split as individuals that live in the world, and that we do not know exactly what's our place in the culture is. We do not know what we want. We are always trying to fill it up, and it never ends. And this is basically the void that characterizes human beings, and it's probably the only thing we have universally in common, is exactly this whole that stitches together. And I was thinking, with this infinite judgment, I think this idea is very clearly there. I don't know if you agree.
No, I agree, and I think it's something that on a historical level could be explored, but of course also on a contemporary, let's say, cultural level. Like I think that's one of the problems I always faced when I was doing my anthropology studies, is this idea of, well, the trap of what you would call culturalism. It means that you would exotize the other, that you would go to another culture, and you would in fact, because of your own lack of your own. I think one thing we could agree upon is that most people that started to study anthropology, for example, is because they feel this problem with modernity. They see that it's traumatic, and they see that it makes people deeply unhappy. But the danger is, of course, that you somehow start to operate with a sort of sublimated, the grass is greener on the other side logic, and that you would then go to study, let's say, a tribe or a sort of indigenous culture of something that is still traditionally consistent, well, at first glance mostly, and that you in fact as an anthropologist would try to stitch all the gaps and all the scars and all the ruptures in such cultures together, and that your ethnography becomes a kind of like holistic, almost manifesto of the culture that is then repressed or became a minority in this global capitalistic hegemonic world we are into. That's not to say that there is some basic truth in that. The problem is only that we are falling into the trap of using something that interests us, that we find interesting, or that we to close our own anxiety somehow. And so I think this shows also how, I think that's what ideology basically means. And it shows also how ideology is stitched on our bodies and our thoughts. It's not something that is outside there, that I think even if we study musicology, or we are an artist, or we are on the level of, I don't know, we make art for the Venice Biennale or Documenta Castle, or we are a choreographer. I think we are always confronted with the same problem. How are we dealing with our proper anxiety, and let's say project that to a perfect world outside, and bring that and try to articulate then. So what we are interested in is, I think, looking for shit from all the sides. I think that's basically and so I think the message of it all is even much more dark and much more pessimistic in this sense. It's not that there is something really to if there is something to redeem, if there is something to recuperate, it's just a bone, so to speak. It's just this one part of the infinite judgment. It's just this shit we have to deal with. And yeah, I think even if you are in performance, what do you try to perform to your public? How do you do it? How do you just not try to communicate your own certainties? As you said, also very beautiful before. I think that's also what the sublime is about. Is this sublime in the outside? Do you just, as a performer, try to give people a sublime experience, or is there a sort of other sublime? This is very contemporary, I think, and I think what we are going to try to do is finding or exploring how people also in the past have been struggling with the same thing. And why do we find this important, Luís? I don't know if you agree, but it is basically because that's exactly the part that we feel that theorists of today and intellectuals mostly from the left, maybe you can blame the left for that, is that they have never addressed really that. They just mostly talk about the present, about the future, but they have cut completely with the past, as if it's something that you have just delivered to the wrong hand, so to speak. It's something that there is not. While this is, I would say, very, very totally not Hegelian and not Lacanian. If you look at the works of Lacan and the works of Hegel, I think both of them were deeply, deeply immersed in the past, in medieval culture, in Renaissance culture, in Baroque painting, in legal structures from antiquity to medieval times to early modernity. Even in the works of Marx, I think this is something that even is underdeveloped, and where you see that still the early Marxists were still much more involved in. That is the whole history, for example, of revolts and pre-revolutions. This whole idea that history is continuously exercising itself to try to get to a sort of consciousness of what emancipation could be. I think we are a little bit stuck in this possibility of the problem with potentiality and actuality, the idea that we have to actualize revolutions and not being able to think them first. And that in this thinking them adequately, there is already something revolutionary there. Well, what I try to do is just showing how all these things that look very far from each other, that they are in fact not contradictory, and that they are all part of the same exploratory terrain, I think, where we are going to dive into.
Yes, and this idea of pre-modernity, I think, is very in vogue today. Even, for example, like in the States, you have now Trump, and of course, the United States are a production of modern world, so to say. There was no United States in the pre-modern times, but still, this idea of make America great again, even if this great again is not literally pre-modern, the pre-modern still holds the value of the non-alienated past, and this, I think, what we are trying to attack. Or at least to reconstruct.
Would you agree that that's also why the Gothic novel in the 19th century, I think of Henry James, but also then how that in Gothic American films continues this idea of Gotham City, you know, the idea of New York as this dark reverse side of this wonderful American dream, that they need to go back to the Gothic in order, like European dark times, in order to tackle a sort of contemporary rupture, a time of darkness and so on, and they have to bring up. I think it's something we will probably also dive a lot into, how already Gothic and Neo-Gothic and well, how you deal with all this medieval patrimony in order not only to stitch together your holes, your breaks and ruptures, but also to somehow to get near to them, to be able to touch them, and to approach them in a way.
Yeah, and I think maybe just to get in Žižek and this preface of this amazing work, I think his first concept kind of connects with that, the idea of Ptolemization, of something that always seems to be a radical change, but at the end it ends up being just replacing a fantasy by another fantasy. And I think we can develop this idea a lot, but also
just to be very clear here, Luís, you're talking about the beginning of the preface of the Sublime Object.
Sure.
We are already in the book, right? We dived into the book.
The preface to the second edition. So it's I think it's to the second edition, or to the new edition.
You also agree, Luís, that what we like to offer is a sort of I called it before an amuse-gueule, that we make our listeners, let's say, warm to dive into this book, no? Because we think it's quite important also to understand this. Well, even if you don't know anything about Hegel and nothing about Lacan, don't you agree that what he also says in the preface is that the miracle of what he's trying to do is by stitching them together, Hegelian thought and Lacanian thought, that, well, shit comes out, but in something, maybe even if you have, it's not, maybe because I could imagine that some listeners would get immediately afraid, like they would say, but we have never even dived into Hegel nor in Lacan. Why would we? That nevertheless, through Žižek, that's maybe what that the miracle of Žižek himself is that he is capable of putting these two in the meat grinder, and what gets out is a sort of it's something that you can approach, I would dare to say. You don't need a PhD on Hegel and Lacan to read this, right?
Yes, and of course, some of these concepts are difficult to grasp. And while reading the preface, we had some discussions on how to grasp some of these subjects and some of these notions. But I think you're completely right. Žižek makes this amazing job at getting two amazingly and really difficult writers, maybe like the two writers that are notoriously hard to read, and somehow they kind of simplify each other in this way that now through one I can read the other.
And that's an achievement, I would say. I think, because I want to just say something about that. You also know, of course, that there is an ongoing sort of bashing of Žižek, even among non-intellectuals and intellectuals, because he's also a meme. He's a figure that appears. There is a lot. He's a sort of clown of philosophy. I think what we want to show is that this clownesque aspect is really connected to the deep core of what he's talking about, and it's in fact also really connected to the impasse we are trying to. In fact, the making himself into a clown and making himself into this public figure of repulsion almost is almost staging what you call then the kernel of his own thought. It's this moment of what the French would call the insupportable. There is something unfuckable in this. And I think that what is the unfuckable today? I think this is the core of his thinking. It's like what Lacan would call, I think, the saint, the idea of a figure of repulsion, a figure that would live in. There is this wonderful, I think it's in one of these films of that he made, these documentaries where he's in this trash park, you like this waste, like a kind of like a favela or just like and where he's it's like he's in his biotop there. And of course it's a caricatural statement, but for me, this is what Walter Benjamin says in the Thesen on the history. It's when the angel of history, that would be then the figure of Žižek himself, flies, but maybe it's in the 21st century, it's an angel without wings even. Like you have to just wade through the garbage, because the garbage heaps are even so much more than in 1940, you know, like we are. So I think this is a continuously repressed aspect today, to see how Žižek himself stands for this impossible trauma of modernity. He incarnates this trauma, I would say, and it's and so you would say, well, people that hate him, people that bash him, they have maybe understood something more about him than people that love him, because loving him means to embrace a piece of shit in a way, and it's this element of trauma that is so hard. It's also hard to well, I don't know what you think of that, but yeah, I mean, I think it's just important to tell our listeners and viewers that, in fact, even this element of disgust should be dialectized, you can almost say. I think the disgust, you know, Žižek, after this book, he wrote a book on Schelling, which is called The Indivisible Remainder. I would almost dare to say he himself stands for this indivisible remainder. Like, he incarnates this position. And I think that's brave. That's something that a lot of academics today are not willing to do. A lot of performers are not willing to do that, to stand in that position of the both. Everybody wants to be in the position of the spirit, the old Hegelian spirit, where of absolute knowledge. But how do you go in the position of the one that affirms not to know, and being a symbol of impasse and of failure in a way? I mean, that's hard. And yes. So yeah, please.
Yeah, I was going to say that it also relates to the way we try to deconstruct authority also, and in Žižek's system, it's not about taking out authority and putting a new one. It's not like this idea of Marx that you always need to replace and to somehow invert the hierarchy. That okay, the structure is what it is. You just need to devoid authority. You have to see it for what it really is, and not as this substantial, untouchable element that you should obey without thinking. And the way Žižek desubstantializes itself, I think it's part of his meta discourse also, that he presents himself as you said, as this joker, as this not knowing figure that constantly undermines his own opinions and his own discourse. And you see him very, very often attacking his previous ideas. And of course, you mentioned like the book that comes after this one, where he basically says, well, if you want to discuss this book that became really, really popular, I'm talking about now the Sublime Object of Ideology, then you need also to discuss the second book, where I disagree with some points on the first, and even says on the preface, those who want to discuss the first book, they should only be allowed if they also read the second book. And this power of just
undermining yourself.
Changing his mind. Exactly, changing his mind and doubting himself and showing himself as I also don't know.
Yeah, exactly.
He's also go on. Sorry.
No, this makes him also so traumatic for us. In fact, because he's standing in our position, I would say he's embodying this what Lacan would call the objet. He embodies this thing that attracts, but at the same time, is traumatic or something. I mean, I think this is really interesting. That and it's also a way to take him serious. We should take him, maybe also in this way, we should take him serious till the end. I think it's not that you can take just some parts of him serious. I think where he's the most clownesque and where he's the most vulgar and repulsive, well, that's where he stands for spirit is a bone. I would say, because that's exactly what it is about. It's, there is this other wonderful example of Hegel, maybe you know that, where he talks about the penis, the organ of procreation, but also of urination, where Hegel, I think it's also something we, in our text that we made as the program for the Association Spirit is Born, which you can read downstairs here in a PDF. What we love, I think, is the aspect of comedy also in Hegel and also in Lacan. Of course, what makes them great philosophers is the comical aspect and the subversive, ambivalent core of what they are talking about. And so one of these incredible moments in the phenomenology of spirit is exactly this huge talk, of course, on phrenology. This kind of pseudo science of Gall, who was then a phrenologist who believed, like the physiognomist, who believed that you on the face expression, like my stupid tomato face and your banana, that you could get some truth out of this appearance. And the same with the skull, that you could, on the deformations and the bumps of the skull, you would be able to say something about a person. Well, in an incredible way, Hegel says, well, in fact, I don't agree, but I also agree with that when he says that essence is appearance, being is appearance. In this sense, if you say spirit is a bone, of course, it's an impossibility, but this impossibility, this non-relation, is the truth of this relation somehow. So I think we both love this comical aspect. But so now back to the organ of procreation. There is this wonderful passage that is also in the phenomenology, where he talks about the organ of sexuality, the phallus, as Lacan would call it. Also with the same ambiguity. Often feminists have not understood that the phallus is at the same time the signifier for impotence. In the same way, Hegel talks about the penis as being the organ of urination, of the lowest, of the most vile performances we have to do every day, and so-called, for symbolic culture, the highest procreation, making babies. And then there is this wonderful Heine parody. Heinrich Heine has this parody where a girl says, "Oh my God, I just opened your pants and I saw that. How can it be that you don't have two organs? At least we would split. We could use one for urination and the other for the sexual act." Well, the conclusion is, of course, no. Well, that's reality. We have both at the same time, and we have to grapple with this disgusting impossibility we are confronted with daily, I think. And well, I think that's maybe the glasses we are trying to go also to look at old painting. I mean, not only just the obvious ones like Caravaggio and Jérôme Bosch, where you have maybe already the disgust but also more subtle painters and how they, but also works of music. I think that's also something we are very much into that, how musical works, and it's a very untouched domain, how music, maybe the only one that ever touched upon that was Adorno. And he is, of course, a very controversial figure. And well, we have to talk about that also. But okay, I'm sorry. I think we go from this to that, and I'm deviating from the right path.
No, I think that to deviate is part also of the right path. If
the way
there's
to.
one.
But we are.
Okay, so
you were talking about this. The first element that we were talking about. Maybe we should still take that up. This idea when he, in the beginning of the preface, Žižek talks about the problem of psychoanalysis and of Hegelianism is the problem of its controversy, the fact that it's not very popular today, that it's seen as pseudoscience, and that Freud himself, Sigmund Freud, he made this self-declaration that psychoanalysis was a Copernican revolution, as Kant's philosophy was a Copernican revolution, and so on. Like, these are, let's say, huge cuts into human thinking. And this is, of course, like quite, let's say, maybe arrogant and yeah, you have to have the guts to make such a declaration. And I think what Žižek there in the beginning says is, look, is psychoanalysis such a Copernican revolution, or is it rather what he then calls a Ptolemization, which would mean, in fact, everything stays the same. We are just adjusting some little stuff here and there to be able to like what people would call the difference between reform and revolution. Maybe reform, you change a little bit here and there, you give some privileges to the subaltern classes and so on, and voila, and everything stays as it is, right?
Yeah, and it's also a way to deal with the same gap. No, it's the idea of Copernican revolution. Then at the end you see that, well, maybe you are just doing the same but in a different way, and it has fundamental to do with how do we deal with this impossibility that we have been talking about. And then maybe we can claim that all Copernican revolutions that seem like Copernican revolutions end up being more Ptolemizations in the end. And just to define better the term, is the idea that a Ptolemization is when some discipline, as Žižek says, to be able to accommodate some complaints, just basically changes some basic parts of it, just to be able to keep going. And as a position, the Copernican revolution is a radical, drastic cut and change. And maybe by dialectizing this concept of Ptolemization, we can really see that, well, maybe everything is a Ptolemization. There's not really a Copernican revolution, because we are always dealing with the same problem.
Yeah, but at the same time, you could also think that this is also the typical domestication of anything new that is appearing in thought, in civilization, in politics. The problem, what Hegel maybe would be the position of the unhappy consciousness, the idea of the skeptic or the stoic, who from the sideline looks at phenomena and well would I think that's also something that he tackles in the preface, and is very interesting and very complex to think, is that it's something that we continuously do, is that we think that reality is something natural and something really there. And if we talk about something, if we talk about concepts, if we talk about ideas, if we talk about, they can only be self-referential, and they are only happening in their own realm, and they have no link to reality. You can say that's the position of Kant. I think Žižek analyzes that also in the beginning. So you just think, but what you think is just your own subjective ruminations. They stay in yourself. And what that has to do with reality, well, we have no clue. We have no fucking clue with it, what it does. Has it any impact? And so I think for me, this preface is also about, for me, it's also an antidotum, really, to cut finally with common sense and with this continuous naturalization of reality. I think we are daily confronted, when we talk with our friends, when we talk among each other, that we give substance to arguments based on, well, but in reality it's like that. Or so we compare continuously conceptual ideas. Maybe you could call them with Hegel, as he does in the preface, these notions, these determinational notions or notional determinations. The fact that reality is a substantial, actualized something in which we are, and with which we have to continuously test our thoughts. And I think what Hegel is doing is exactly the opposite. And that's why also for him, the notional determination, that's what he's talking about later on in the preface. This we will come to that. the notion is exactly this possibility of cutting with nature and with the natural and with natural reality, with commonsensical intuition, which we need because otherwise we would just go crazy, I guess. But nevertheless, which we in philosophy, and therefore maybe philosophy is never bad sociology, or because for me, like when I hear people talking about, but the questionnaires say that, or the numbers say that, or it's proven this, so many people, the typical, the Jordan Peterson logic, that there is this kind of like sociological truth as being in reality tested. I think that the Hegelian thinking and also the Lacanian thinking is, and that's of course the legacy of structuralism also. It means that you try to think things in a way disconnected from the wealth of reality, you would say. I think that's also the term that Žižek literally uses, and I think that's maybe even making the bridge to the first concept, because that's when he starts to immediately put the most difficult words of Hegel, of the phenomenology and of the dialectical Hegelian thinking. It's this word, what is in English called sublation. In German, they use the term Aufhebung, which is at the same time something that you elevate. Aufheben means elevating, but it means also losing it. But at the same time, it means you preserve it also. So there is already this complete contradiction in this term of sublation. They couldn't find a better term in English. But for Žižek, and that I find so interesting, is that for Žižek, Aufhebung is connected to reduction, right?
Yeah. Yes, and it is also a stand against the modern trend of non-intellectualization, that we should take things for what they really is in their, as you said, in the wealth of reality. We should be against this over-intellectualization because it creates us a distance between educated and non-educated people, and that there's this debate even in the left happening, and Žižek takes the opposite path, so to say. He really, as you said, he stands for a reduction of all these problems, that they should be reduced to their abstract notion, to the idea of notional determination, that you take the ideas out of nature, so to say, and you discuss them in the abstract world, and then you, as we will see, you do something with them, and then you put them back into nature, but differently.
But you could imagine that this is somehow, if you have never read Lacan, or even this is a shock in a way, because it means that you have to leave behind, I would say, even what Lacan would call the imaginary. It would mean you would step out of your pacifiers. You would have your daily enjoyments, your the things you need in order to go on. It's really a radical cut with a lot of fantasy in a way.
Yes, and against like the let's call it hegemonical take on history readings right now, is that new historicism really needs this context. It really needs these roots with reality, that Žižek is saying, no, for you to think these concepts, you have to take them out first. You have to reduce them to their basic contradiction, and then you can understand them. And so in a way, this is kind of counter movement. And as we will see, it just produces amazing results, I would say.
Yeah, and it feels also very counterintuitive, because it looks always much more. I have that with me in art also. It looks much more intuitive to just stand in front of a painting and just tell yourself what you see, what you like about it. A sort of like, let's say, a sort of, well, maybe a cheap phenomenological approach, like just a kind of very direct approach. The problem is not that this cannot be enjoyable and that this cannot be nice. The problem is also always that feels like it has some deep truth in it. That when you are just standing in front and you believe in direct access to something, that it has this magic of, well, why common sense and intuition are so attractive, I think. And I think what he tries to do here, Žižek with Hegel, because I think another thing that I wanted to stress here, Luís, I don't know if you agree, but it's very strange that in the beginning of the preface he says, well, I will show you how this miracle of the stitching of Hegelian with Lacanian thought will work, or how that is worthwhile or not. That at the same time he doesn't almost talk about Lacan. There is almost no, it's as if Lacan, you should just, it's like in a sort of disguised way or a subterranean way there, but it's almost only about Hegel. By the way, it's something, but just to say that, because at the same time, what I see as a superstructure of this small preface is also that I saw that just yesterday night when I was for another time trying to get through this preface, that the whole, let's say, parcours that Žižek is making here is in fact what is a sort of quick tour through the three orders, the true registers of Lacan. Namely, you are in the imaginary, you have to go to the symbolic, that's then abstraction, let's say, and then finally you see that also the other is shit just as you are, and so on. We are all in the mud, this kind of logic. Well, we are all in the real. You're confronted with the real. That's the third register for Lacan. I have the feeling that this is somehow the non-articulated substructure he never talks about Lacan, or only in the beginning when he talks about him when he talks about the beginning, when he talks about abstraction, when he says like, look, we need to do this element of abstraction, what he called the notion. And then he says this simplification, this notion, this notional determination, we could compare that with what Lacan called the unary trait. I have been struggling with this thing a lot, and still I'm not sure if real Lacanians, not like we just misfits, let's say, of thought, but the proper thinkers or Hegelians, if they would agree with that, even it's I think that's one of the difficulties of Žižek, that he a little bit like how we are talking, we put out ideas, we put out flashes of homology, and he writes them down. I think what orthodox thinkers or academic thinkers would not dare to do, let's say, not thriving on their own, just flashes of thought. Like, is there not something parallel here? Is it this continuously questioning? Can we not see a parallel between that and that? Well, that's what he literally does here. And I think this is a shock for us because we don't get it. We have to grapple with that, like spirit is a bone. Why is the notional determination of Hegel, can that be compared with what Lacan calls the unary trait? But I think for the nice thing here, I would almost, it's for the listeners who are on the same level as us, beginners or whatever, or people who are just wildly like amateur, let's say. What I like a lot is that this is equally a shock for academics. They don't know what to do with this. They cannot go through this. For them, it's their spirit is a bone. For academics, this is a problem because they don't know how to. And I think we were reading some texts there was a Canadian, what was his name? Reed. We were reading Reed on digestion, animal digestion in Hegel. I think it was a very nice text. Maybe we can put it also on our downstairs somewhere. And then we were also reading the Belgian Lacanian scholar Marc de Kezel. Well, we felt in this text that for him, it's Žižek is the trauma, right?
Yes, he cannot really agree with this reading that Žižek presents of Hegel, and even says like he even says that the way Žižek describes, for example, this very infamous image of shitting out a notion or an idea, is that the way he interprets it, it shows the limit of his entire project. So it's really a very, very, very big opposition, and I think it connects with what I was saying in the beginning, that to understand Žižek, you have to release the idea that you have to grasp everything about an author and just do like this coherent reading that has no spaces for points of not knowing, and that it doesn't have any gaps,
and grapple with his limits, grapple with the limits that he is himself.
And these are the parts that you really should stress, that these limits, these gaps, these points of these nodules of not knowing are exactly what you should be grappling with. And basically, maybe to go back in the preface before the unary trait, because I think
Luís, I was even thinking that we even forgot to say something about the title, because that not, and even prefaces are always traumatic in themselves, no? Because do you need a preface? And if you dive into the preface of the arch preface is the preface of Hegel in the Phenomenology of the Spirit, where he says no preface can ever get on the level of a real preface, because there is something self-contradicting in this preface. It ruins itself, or it annulates itself. But the title of the preface, before we go to what you wanted to go through, I think we need to, because you talked already about shit, maybe some listeners will think, why are they now suddenly talking about shit? The title of the preface is called The Idea's Constipation. And in fact, it alludes to what we also, I think, were talking about before, is the main, let's say, trick or tool of Hegel himself, is that, namely, how do you deal with the other? How do you deal with outside world? How do you deal with the problem that there is this gap between thoughts and an outside world that seems to be disconnected? You can almost say the problem of every incel. And in this sense, we are all incels, in the sense that we feel entitled to some part in reality, and we are not. We are stuck in our own thoughts, I would say. And well, I think there is this constipation element already there. So we have to appropriate the outside world. We have to swallow it all up. We have to digest it. And what happens in this digestion is that, as the old critique on Hegel would be, is that just Hegel swallows up everything. There is this Adorno, I think.
Yes.
What is it again?
Yeah, that is the belly of the mind, or something like this, no?
The mind turned belly, or the belly turned mind. Or
exactly. Hegel is the mind turned belly. Exactly.
So this idea that the monster is Hegel, that swallows everything up and sticks with that. He's constipated, like a sort of gargantua, a horrible, monstrous giant figure that has swallowed up all the outer world and is stuck in it. So that's this digestion process, and that's the constipation. And of course, what the Ljubljana school will be interested in, not only Žižek, but also, you named them already, Mladen, Dolar, and Alenka, Zupančič, is this element of the unthinkable element, namely, wait a minute, but don't we have to go to the smallest cabinet and shit out? Don't we have to? Is there not a remainder here? Is there not something coming out? And what comes out? And what to do with what comes out? And well, I think that's literally the breakthrough. That's the laxative, as he says himself. That's the laxative that Hegel himself, the spoon of laxative, not the spoon of sugar, no, as in Mary Poppins, but the spoon of laxative that in the 90s or end of the 80s that Žižek is giving to deconstructionist thought, post-structuralist thinking, postmodern thinking, and anti-Hegelian thinking, like thinking that sees mostly some truth in the wealth of reality. I think of differentials everywhere, like differences, like postmodern neoliberal thinking, let's say. So I think this antidotum of this spoon of laxative is exactly to believe that exactly Hegel is somebody that not only digests, but that even this digestion is a sort of, a failing digestion, and that then what comes out is not just a getting rid of the waste, because also that's very important. I think that you make this difference of it's not just getting rid of waste and that's then, no, it's exactly the most important gesture, what's happening there. But okay, this brings us too far. I don't know, maybe we have to the point that you wanted to stress after this constipation title.
Yeah, it was this idea that because he makes his oppositions between understanding and reason, and I think it also connects our work with the work, for example, of New Historicism, which is the I would say main hegemonical reading of history right now. And it's interesting that it doesn't oppose understanding to reason exactly. In the same way, I don't think we are opposed to New Historicism. For Žižek and also for Hegel, the reason is a radical understanding. Is that if you take understanding far enough, you will reach reason. In the same way, we are not being ahistorical or anti-historical, we are being radically historical. And I think this is an interesting and an important point to stress, is that we are not against a let's say typical way of doing it. We are just asking, okay, so if you are going this way, just go all the way. And it relates a lot with I think what you said about this notional determination is, what do we abstract? I think that is I think the question that separates maybe us from new historians, so to say, is that what should it be abstract? Is it the relation as difference, as you said? This differential, the thing that we should abstract. And I think like Foucault and Marx would do this, would say that the thing that characterizes a specific context is the power relation, is a capital relation. How did these people relate to each other? This is, I think, the thing we should abstract. And in a way, I identified this with, as you said, the unary trait. For me, the unary trait is the difference in itself. But if we start abstracting relations, power relations, and saying all a context is, if I look at a particular episode in history, all that episode is the power relations between the subjects in play. The reason would say, then wait, if I go all the way, then what I should abstract is how these power relations fail. And I think this is the entering in reason, is not how they are established, but also after they're established, how do they fail? What are the points of no meaning, of non-meaning, that actually are the kernel of these situations, I would say.
Yeah, that's interesting, and complex at the same time, because you talk about new historicity of new historicism. I think is the original, which maybe for some listeners is not very clear what that exactly is. It's a phenomenon that I guess came up in the 80s. No, it's a sort of, I think it's like historians taking up the thinking of Michel Foucault, basically.
Yeah.
No, I think you can make this kind of like generalized idea that, and one of the great figures there was Stephen Greenblatt, with his books on Shakespeare. And they did very interesting things. But what you are saying, if I understand you well, Luís, is that there are two ways of dealing with the outside world, with knowledge, with thinking about phenomena. And the two ways are what Hegel would have called, the first way is understanding. And the second way is what he would have called reason. And so he makes this split, which is maybe also not very obvious because many philosophers never made it. I think if you look at even Aristotle or empiricists from the 17th century, they would have not made such a split, basically because they find this second step, reason, very problematic. They stick to understanding. I think what you could say is that also Hegel sees it a little bit like that, is that the traditional, the huge tradition of philosophy for Hegel also, and I would almost dare to say for all these thinkers in this line, is that it's a tradition of understanding. That it means you try to distinguish and to count and to name phenomena in the outside world. You try to split, to cut. You try to make abstractions in order to understand something. The second part, what Hegel calls reason, it's very interesting because, as you know, I'm very fascinated by this. I talked already about him, this late medieval philosopher Nicolaus of Cusa, which I think Hegel repressed. He never talks about him, but it cannot be that he took a lot of things. The same pair of thought distinction is to be found in Cusa's writings. So you have ratio and intellectus. It goes, of course, also back to antiquity also, but of Neoplatonism and so on. But okay, it's very clear this link between Cusanus and what Cusanus would call intellectus would be what in the medieval times was not called Aristotelian dialectics, like Aristotelian logic, but that would be called mystical dialectics, or they would not even use the term dialectics, they would call it mystical theology. So it was not theology as we know it today. It would have meant something like almost Hegelian dialectics, but then seen as theology. Because why is that? It's because you cannot go through this element of reason if you don't think, for example, infinity. If you are in a finite structure, as most Aristotelians and post-Aristotelians are, well, the world is just what it is and we have to grapple with the world that it is. But because we think the world, there is this gap. Our thinking is, in fact, already a sign of the fact that in this reality, there is something not completely kosher, you can say. Something is already cracking there. And I think it's this crack in reality that also a thinker like Žižek goes continuously back. He returns continuously to that. And I think for us, what we are so interested in is that, strangely enough, it seems that after, it's a little bit like what you talked about Fukuyama. You can almost say that new historicism is the Fukuyama fetish in historian academics. It's like, well, after new historicism, there was nothing there anymore. We are all this, you can say all the historicistic or even academic history thinking or historical science is just still new historicism. We are still continuously in this. It means it takes also historicism as for granted. It means that looking at the past in a sort of reenactment modus is the way to look at the past. There is no other way. Like there is this past there, people thought in a certain way, and we don't know how they were doing and how they did it, and we have now to unravel how they were doing that. That's basically, very simplified, what it is about. I think our endeavor moves contrary to that. We are trying to open up historical thinking for this crazy miracle that Žižek is talking about. And I think what we are in the next shows are going to try to do is showing how that concretely would work, how that would be, what the consequences are also of that. So it's not just that we are subjects now and that we don't know what happened, but that we already in our not knowing are implied in what's happening in the past. It means also that the past is absolutely not a stable, substantial reservoir out of which we can pluck truth and reality. It means that the truth of the past is always linked to our subjective thinking about it. Subjective also, I think we have to still talk a lot about what we mean with subject, what Žižek means with subject, how we take that up, because also subject, of course, is and subjectivity is, there is a lot of common sense around that notion, which we should unpack. I think it's very important to do that. Well,
yeah, but would you say that we are truly opposed to? Because the way I see it, of course, you have the traditional old way of reading history, that you take a source, you take a description of some past, and you read what it says, and then you think, okay, this is what happened. This is literally what happened. But then you take a different source, or even the same source, and you start finding things that do not that make sense, of course. And you have one description that says one thing, and then a different description of the same thing just makes it completely different. And then, of course, you have to decide. And then you have multiple narratives that do not go together. And then you have to decide. And then what the revolution, so maybe a Ptolemization or a Ptolemaic revolution that New Historicism does, is that, well, let's not believe what the source says on the surface. Let's look for what it hides. So if you have a specific, so if you have a specific,
can I add something to
sure.
that? I think, because otherwise I would maybe lose your great example, which resembles very much an example of Lévi-Strauss that Žižek talks a lot about, is this with these two villages that have to draw their own structure of the village, and the two villages, the two things look completely different. I think that's exactly what you now describe, what Žižek would call the parallax view. It means that Žižek would say the truth of this element is the parallax of these two impossible sources that you just described. So it's not going through the depth of the source. It is to take the two appearances serious in their impasse. And that's something that we have the feeling, I guess, that New Historicism cannot think. They just lack the proper, let's say, instruments, the proper, tools, the proper methodology, I would almost say. They fall always back into this naturalistic, phenomenological approach, something that you have then to take for granted, something also out of the personality of the proper reading of the investigator or the researcher. That can be interesting, but who cares in the end about anecdotes in this way? Well, I think what you so wonderfully showed in your example is how we have to stay on the surface, but at the same time cracking open the surface through what I think in later talks and thoughts, if you agree with me, was this, it's a wonderful example of what Žižek calls the parallax and the parallax view on something.
Yes. My point is that, of course, first you have this traditional hermeneutics of reading things literally, and then New Historicism says no, there's a depth behind it, and we need to look behind the text. So Foucault would say, where is the power? Who has the power? And the relations are what matter. And I think what we propose and what Žižek proposes and this Lacanian school proposes is that, no, let's go back to the text. Let's read the text, maybe superficially, yes, as you said. So it's not what it hides, but what it reveals without knowing it's being revealed. And this is like the psychoanalytical process in a nutshell. Often you get to the clinic and you lay down on the couch and you have this amazing insight that you had just before you entered the clinic, that you say, no, now I discovered something amazing about myself that was hidden, and I will let my analyst know, and she will be impressed because I have this amazing insight. And then you lay down, you start to tell your story. And before you reach the point where you tell your insight, the analyst stops you and says, wait, you use this specific word or this specific expression. What does that mean? And then, of course, the insight is not your insight, the thing you brought, but the way you put it out. And the way you use your discourse to describe something that happened to you is actually more important than what you mean to say. And I think this is our approach to history, is that, of course, sources are incredibly important, and we are not saying sources do not matter. And it's not also about being just completely relativistic and anything goes, but let's read the text. Let's see how the text shows, not knowing and inadvertently, what history cannot even articulate about itself. What these people could not see in their own world because their ideological horizon was hiding. And that's why I think, and you were mentioning Angelico and Pollock before, is that Angelico would never be able to call what he did abstract, but of course it is. It's already abstract in the moment he does it, but the only way we can see it is that we go forward 500 years and then look back and says, yeah, it's through Pollock that we can see what Angelico really did. Is that emancipating the past is exactly this movement, is that you show what's hidden in a specific context, that it's already there, but you can only see it from the future. And that's, I think, history should be all about that.
This element of already there, I think it's crucial indeed.
Yeah.
Like, and this reminds me also, I have two thoughts here. That's one thing is that that it doesn't mean, because we are in this end point, maybe a sort of strange deadlock that we feel both of us with new historicism, that what happened before could not be redeemed in a Benjaminian way, you can almost say. That, for example, I think of another example by Didi-Huberman, and I think it's a book that we absolutely are eager to tackle and to read together in this upcoming shows, is this his analysis of the thought of Georges Bataille, how he pushes Bataille out of this a little bit let's say cheap and even commonsensical idea of a dualistic transgressive thinker, really obsessed by transgression, and how he Lacanizes, how he dialecticizes Bataille. Yeah. And then the second point is also then how he proposes Bataille. He does the same with Abi Warburg, I think, but even in what he did with Bataille is now, to my feeling, although I was always much more somehow taken by Abi Warburg, but what he now coming back through our mutual work to this book on that he wrote on, that is only translated, that is only written in French, it's not translated into English, but that he wrote on Bataille, it's called L'Informe, or it's about the informe. Yeah. I forgot the title, but the formless or the deformation, where he proposes that in fact what we have forgotten is a school of art history that could have taken the lead through a journal in the 20s and 30s of Georges Bataille called Document. And what he proposes, I find that I don't know if it's a sort of counterfactual, maybe it is a little bit, I don't know. But anyhow, what I love is that, and Didi-Huberman does that a lot, and I think there is something absolutely still not yet taken up by art history, for example, academic art history. They're also stuck in what you would call the new iconology, coming from Panofsky, still even maybe they think it's now a little bit more postmodern and so on. But I think that Didi-Huberman, I think he escapes the postmodern trap, and what he tries to do is what never anybody has seen before him, is that in the time that Panofsky was developing his iconology, which is a sort of, I would almost dare to say, a new historicism for art history. But then we are talking now about the 20s, 30s, and then after the Second World War, when he moved to where did he move? Princeton, I think, Panofsky.
Yeah.
Where he changed completely his jargon away from this Hegelian German language. He completely refashioned his own language, something very intriguing how Panofsky did that. But what's happening is that there was Bataille, a complete marginalized figure in France. He had a degree of medieval studies. He worked in the Bibliothèque Nationale in Paris. And then he makes this kind of counter Iconology magazine document, where he proposes, well, you can say an art history with a gap, an art history with failures. Thanks to Didi-Huberman, we see that now. And even, I mean, this whole project got completely bashed by the guys from October in New York, by Rosalind Krauss, the whole gang there of New York art historians, Hal Foster and so on. And they stick to this dualistic Bataille, for example. And then I find it very interesting how also Didi-Huberman complains a little bit in his the afterword that he wrote then afterwards in the new publicity of this book, the new publication, that he says, like, look, it's so hard to think dialectically. Nevertheless, it's the only thing we what we can do. We have to stick to this dialectical way of thinking. He thinks also of Ernst Bloch, for example, an historian, philosopher from the 20s. And when Bloch was in America, that he says it's almost impossible in the States to establish something like dialectical thinking. And this is established by Hegel. This is taken up by Lacan. I think this is the way we want to make. I think what we really aim is to open up this thought for people who are into arts, who are into performing arts, who are artists themselves, who are maybe into cultural studies, and who are feeling also a little bit this deadlock of theory. It means for me also deadlock of a horizon to think music, to think arts, to think art practice. Well, and I think dialectics, it's not just an opening of the field of practice, it's opening the horizon itself. Exactly. towards which we could think of this.
Yeah, and changing the horizon, I think this is really important what you said just now, because changing the horizon also changes a particular insight. To think locally with a different horizon, it dramatically changes. And also, just because you were talking about just now music, for example, and I think it's a beautiful example to how understanding evolves into reason. Is exactly in music? I think shows that so well, that you have like a music score, like the notes are there and everything seems like coherent. Let's say music looks like
and closed in itself, right? Closed in itself.
Exactly. Yeah, a completely coherent and cohesive discourse. And then you play the song or you sing the song that's on the music score, and suddenly you are confronted with this anxiety that, as Da Vinci would say, that music is the thing that dies the moment it's born. And this anxiety that music brings then retroactively illuminates how the score in itself is also split, is also incomplete. That the score has at all not enough information for you to do it absolutely.
Well, it's wonderful that you recall all these ideas, because it's also that it's something that people know, that music is putting your pants down, singing or playing an instrument. But it also goes for all performing arts, acting. If you want to play to perform a theater piece or whatever you want to call, it's about art as pure failure, because you can never you can never reach the apparent closeness of the original text or the score. And that's also why critique is possible, why art critique is possible, and why there is this fetishism of art criticism, because of course they can always jump on the failure, because what they have to obfuscate here is basically that all art is about, well, all art. That's also wonderful how Walter Pater, this Victorian scholar in the pre-Raphaelite circle there in the UK in the 19th century, was saying that all art aspires to the condition of music.
Yeah.
I always read that as all art aspires to the condition of failing. Maybe Beckett understood that, no? So
failure, I think, is one of the most important ideas that I think we agree that our work evolves around failure.
Yeah, and it's not failure as, oh, we have to see how we fail all the time. It's more how we can, and that's also, art is this terrain, and I think therefore we want to talk a lot about art and art practice. Art practice is the articulation of failure as success, you could say. It's the only terrain where you are allowed to stage failure and making it into a success. You could only hope that this could be a sort of paradigm for the rest of our culture we live in. I don't know, but no, I agree completely with that. And I think that what you said also, of course, this wonderful quote of Leonardo, no, exactly when he points at that. But it's also interesting to add to that for him, and that's maybe the repression that Leonardo had to do himself, that for him this was meant to mean to articulate the failure of music. For him, the failure of music was that it always dies at birth. So every note you sing is the last note. Every song you do is a swan song. It's always you. Also, when we talk, that's maybe also in the hysterical talk, that you are always afraid to fall into the void, into a silence, into a gap. So you keep on talking. No, that's also an example that Žižek on and on, where he talks about his own meta talking that goes on and on, because the hysteric is afraid that, or the obsessional hysteric, whatever you want to call it, is afraid that you would just be confronted with what you are continuously hiding by talking, namely this void or this emptiness or this gap, whatever you want to call it. So this gap as the core of art was seen by Leonardo. I find it really interesting that you mentioned this, because it shows also how we have to rethink these Renaissance artists. They were much more complicated and complex. They had a thought that grappled already with this problem, even if they in the end could not think it through, even if they couldn't say, okay, like Beckett, fail and fail better or whatever. You cannot think Beckett without this. You can even, and it's only through Beckett, again, let's say Beckett, through Beckett to Leonardo, we need to think again Leonardo through what is revealed by 21st or 20th century art, in fact, right?
Yes, and I was thinking also connected with that, because there's this short documentary by Jean Painlevé, and it's called The Notation of Movement, if I'm not mistaken. It's a 1949 documentary, where he describes all the various ways choreographers try to write dance movements down. And of course, for anyone, this seems like an impossible mission. And it presents this idea of how music was a tool for this, that they will actually write scores using musical notation, not to describe the music that is danced to, but to describe the movement itself. And of course, he was showing this, and I was thinking, well, but this still doesn't say anything about the performance. You can take this score, so to say, and you can study it, and you can do exactly the movements that are being required for you to do, and still you're not dancing. And this shows that music already is like this, even if it's codified as being a much more holy and whole art. So what you are saying, that all art aspires to the condition of music, is exactly what you said, is all art aspires to the condition of showing failure as their inherent core, so to say.
And would you agree also, Luís, that this is what means also spirit is a bone, that in the end, it is
Yeah,
this,
yes.
it's exactly the position of the artist in its, let's say, most ideal idea, then, or whatever we would like to call it, ideal material idea, materialist ideal, that it's in this gap of spirit and bone and this impasse that art thrives, in fact. And even old art thrives on that. You can say even a painting of Leonardo thrives on that. Even I don't know, a drawing in Lascaux, in the cave of Lascaux, thrives on this. This is because it has to do with the fact that we create not sublimity in this first sense of spiritual elevateness or elevation, but we create it as the gap between spirit and bone, so to say.
Yes, and also between this transcendence that art promises and the earthly functions that art serves. Is also there, this split that you can say, well, and it's a very, very common idea that music in the pre-modern, so to say, let's like put a lot of doubt into this expression. Music in the pre-modern period was purely functional, so it cannot even be called art. And this is a very new historicistic claim, is that it's craft. Until the 18th century, it's craft, and after that, it's art. And maybe it's only, of course, it's craft. Of course, we know it's functional. Of course, we know that this sacred music for, let's say, Catholic liturgy is music composed with an ideological horizon, and it has a function. And no one is, I think, denying this. But at the same time, through this function, we see how the function actually fails in these works of art. That these pieces of music, these paintings, these sculptures, while serving a function, while serving an ideology, also show that this ideology is incomplete, and also undermine and contradict the ideological realm, so to say. And I think you're right. There's a very strong connection between the idea of spirit as a bone. Is that if you have the only way you can perceive the substance, the thing that is unperceivable, so to say, is how this thing that promises no failure actually fails. And I think this is a bone, is that the remainder of an absolute that has no remainders. I think is a big, and at the same time, you look at the bone and you don't see only a bone. And Žižek, we will talk about it, I think, in next episodes when he talks about the Titanic. That when you look at the ruins of Titanic, in the same way that when you look at the body of Christ, you don't see only the ruins of a boat, a typical boat, or the ruins of or the ruins of a man. Actually, when you see Christ, you see something more, something too traumatic to look directly, but that you can only look through that lens. And so these two concepts are so strongly connected, and at the same time not connected.
Yeah, and I had to think also immediately of what you said now, is that at the same time how we say that in the past art was functional, and in this way obfuscate how we don't see the functionality of art today. Right?
Exactly, yes.
How we dysfunctionalize or defunctionalize art as if today art would be freed of patrons and superstructures and can thrive of its own essence, and would be as if art today is not fully endorsed, and not only Žižek but so many people, and that's also, I think, a problem of what with the left today is also struggling with, is that if there is one capitalistic neoliberal phenomenon, I think it's art, contemporary art today.
Yeah.
And so it's
art is make art for this idea of art for art makes very little sense.
But
it never
you see,
did in history.
Exactly, but you see also how we use history in order to free ourselves from any ideology. Yes. So we are even capable here, in your example, we are capable of ideologizing art from the past, saying, yeah, but you have to think it functional. It was mostly the patron who pushed it on the artist. The artist was just a servant. He was just, he had no ideas. He was just a blunt medium or an instrument of the Lord who had all the money and asked him to make a showpiece for a phallic showpiece for the Lord himself, as if there could not have been any subjectivity there. That's also your claim, I think. But at the same time, it liberates us from any. That's also what I think is our problem with modernity. This knife that cuts from two sides. That you can say, okay, we also endorse completely modernity, but on the other hand, we continuously use it in order to distance ourselves from how, in fact, we can ourselves not swallow it. We cannot swallow modernity in the first place. And we continuously, I would almost dare to say, we have always been modern. But we have always been modern, and at the same time, well, to reverse a dictum from Bruno Latour, no, he said in this famous book, we have never been modern. I would say we have always been modern, but we have continuously been unable to take up what it really means. And I would dare to say it means that you, on the one hand, cannot take it up, that you would in one way or another would somehow reconcile, to use a Hegelian word, with the fact that every attempt to take up what it means to be modern, that this fails, in fact. Nevertheless, you cannot not take it up. You have to endorse with it. You have to go to work through modernity. It's the only way. And all scholars, even in humanities, you hear that a lot, that somehow would think that you could be able to think the past or think the other without modernity. They obfuscate the basic, let's say, instrument through which they think the other. Because it's only through, let's say, humanities themselves, the development of science and so on, that we are able to do these abstractions and so on. So, well, I think we will still talk a lot about abstraction. Your example of music is a wonderful example, because it's also how abstraction in a score reaches to performance and to something that happens in the real. Like, what is this? How? And at the same time, there is the real of abstraction, as Lacan would talk about it. The real of the matime, the real of just the musical score. It has something real in its in its totality. It's totalizing, in totalizing an impasse also there, you would say. Okay, I don't know. Shall we wrap it up? Do you think we have to? Are there still things that you absolutely want to say in this episode? We talked not so much about the shitting, maybe, although we did in the beginning. That's always you can listen to Žižek himself about that, because he doesn't talk about anything else. I think we went through a lot of stuff in our rambling and in our...
And the shitting, I think it will come out when we discuss what to do with this system. And that's, I think, also something that I've been struggling with. And I think all Lacanian Hegelians have been discussing this option, like, okay, so if dialectics works retroactively, if you can only look to the past, then now what do you do? And you see this debate. Of course, you have many Hegelian Lacanians trying to do what can be called an Hegelian praxis, how to do in the world with these things, and most of them disagreeing if what's the right way. And I think it is something I think we should get to at some point in this show, is that is there passivity? Is there activity? Do we just look to the past? Do we try to do something in the present? How does that look? Is it even possible to do? And how? And I think this is, the most important thing: how to integrate failure into our thinking. This is, I think, what the thing that Žižek brought to me that is most valuable, and that is somehow struggles also or tries to grasp in the preface and in the entire book is how is failure integrated in the system as a productive way of materializing ideas. And at some point in the preface, he says that I think I'm quoting almost word for word, that material reality is a sign of imperfection or a sign of failure. Is that you only can create something out of failing what you actually want to do, and I think this somehow points the way to how, as artists, we should behave, and also as political subjects, so to say. And it takes away also the danger of utopia, which is a word I don't like very much. And if you think utopia with failure, then maybe it's possible to do something new, I would say.
Yeah, that's interesting. Maybe that's a nice note to end on. I would just maybe add only one thing, is that what we are going in the future, in the next shows, to dive into is these domains, I think, and that resonates with what you just said, are these domains that are the waste and the remainder for Hegelian Lacanians themselves. The past, history, maybe things that come from I not so long time ago, one of my favorite theorists was giving advice to young American student, saying not to go. So he was going to Paris, and he asked this theorist, like, which museum should I visit? And he said, well, go to the Centre Pompidou or go to the Musée d'Orsay, because there you will see real art, and don't go to the Louvre. And well, for me, this sounds too much like giving away the past into the wrong hands. And this is really dangerous. I think it's something that you see all the time, the patrimonialization of art, the patrimonialization and stabilization of the past, of history. How many television programs are now about so-called for new arrivés in the countries, you know, the migrants that arrive there, and young people so-called to learn about the past. But it's the most rigid and constipated, to talk with Žižek Hegel, constipated idea of what history is, in fact. Because history is not anything. It's not anything. It doesn't exist. That's the point. History doesn't exist. It needs to be reinvented. So I think what we forgot, what a lot of Lacanian Hegelians and people, theorists in general, forget is that, and people like Walter Benjamin, Adorno, and many others, Bataille and so on, they understood this. They understood how important it is that history itself has to be made. And you can almost say that, if you want to talk in these terms, revolutionary emancipation or revolutionary practice needs to have a department of history creation, of history production. Because history is not the past. The past is all this not knowing and all these things going on. But then you need to abstract. That's what Žižek literally says. Then you have to cut into it. And these cuts are crucial, because if you cut wrong, your cake will look maybe nice, but it will be uneatable. I mean, it all depends of the cut, I think. And this is the whole point, that how can we get rid of history as this thing that reveals its proper truth as being somehow not dialectically there, but as substantially there, as something that, or how is it that we, through our own thinking, stitch something together there that, well, we could work with for the future, I would say. For the present, I think this is something, so I think it's, sorry that I still had to add this, but I think it's important that we stress this element, that we are working with things that are deemed as not very important and marginal.
But that's what being in the left means. No, the left means identifying with the one that is excluded. So this is, I think, the properly left thing to do is actually to stress the things that are not important.
Absolutely, yeah, and it's the same. In fact, for I see that the same for visual arts and contemporary arts. That we are in a time of a ideological deadlock. I think we are. I mean, there is on the one hand we are what you said before so beautifully. There is the hermeneutical way of doing it, or there is just the blunt natural way. Like art speaks for itself. You just have to experience it. You don't have to talk about it. It's all there. It has eventually no proper meaning, and if it has a meaning, it's an identitarian, in this sense, direct political meaning. Well, I think we are trying to go to other domains. Let's see if maybe we will fail. Probably will fail. Probably there is a lot we will not see, and we will fail. Yeah, and we will miss. I think if you want to read more about what we are trying to do, we put here downstairs the PDF that a little bit is our manifesto. I would dare to say, Luís, if you agree. So, well, I think we are very grateful to started this adventure, thanks to our association. Spirit is a Bone. I don't know if you still want to say a last word.
No, I'm just happy that we start this and that we how to say, for me it's a way of becoming also a better artist, but mostly how does my art speak or should speak to the world we live in, and as you said, I think we are arriving at a deadlock, or we are just there, maybe even that something needs to change without making it worse. And probably I would say the answer is not so much in the past, but in the way we look at the past. And if there's something that is completely, first you can claim all the differences between Trump and Mussolini and Hitler and Bolsonaro and Salazar. You can point every difference possible. Of course there are, but there's something that unites them all, and it's the way they use the past. And the left should not underestimate the power that this tool has for them, and it should reappropriate. I think the left should reappropriate the look at the past as a tool also for them, also for the left.
Maybe in this sense we have to worsen things, and we have to think it as Beckett would have said it in one of his last works. No, worstward ho. That's where we are going. Worstward ho. I don't know where ho is, but maybe this is this utopia, non-utopia you were talking about, and let's worsen things artistically in order to get more in or more out. Let's see.
A place where now, for the body to be in, moving outwards, back into, no out, no back, only in, stay in, on in, still, all of old, nothing else ever tried, ever failed. No matter. Try again. Fail again. Fail better.